unravel the enigma that is Mohs surgery things that we are going to try to tackle today.
Okay.
First, we'll unravel the enigma that is Mohs surgery coding.
Okay.
Then we'll dive into the surprisingly tricky difference between a biopsy and an excision, a distinction that goes way beyond just the size of the cut. Let's start with Mohs surgery. You probably know it's a very precise way to remove skin cancer.
Right.
But did you know that the surgeon also acts as a pathologist during the procedure?
Yeah.
They're analyzing each layer of skin under a microscope in real time to make sure they got all the cancerous cells.
It's pretty amazing when you think about it.
It really is. But this dual role brings up a fascinating question from the guide. Can a separate pathologist also bill for looking at those Mohs slides?
Ooh.
It's a good question, right?
Yeah.
It almost sounds like you're being billed twice for the same thing. What do you think?
Yeah, so that's where the concept of intent in medical billing comes in.
Okay.
See, the Mohs surgeon, looking at the slides, is already factored into the cost of the Mohs procedure itself.
Yeah.
But if a separate pathologist is brought in for a formal consultation,
Okay.
maybe to get a second opinion on a tricky case, then that consultation is considered a distinct billable service.
So there are times when it is appropriate.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's why documentation is so important.
Okay.
The dermatologist has to be really clear in their documentation,
Yeah.
explaining why that second opinion was needed beyond the standard Mohs pathology.
Gotcha.
That justification is key, especially for insurance purposes.
So it's like the Mohs procedure is like ordering a meal that comes with a free dessert,
Right.
but then you decide you also want a guest judge from like a fancy cooking show
Right.
to come in and give their expert opinion on said dessert.
Okay.
Same dessert,
Yeah.
but that expert opinion is an extra service.
It is.
All right. On to puzzle number 2.
I love it. Let's do it.
The guide gave a case study about a patient who has a skin lesion removed.
Okay.
Seems simple enough.
Yeah.
But then the pathology report shows that the issue is more complex than initially thought,
Okay.
and further action is needed. So the big question is, how do you code that whole process correctly?
Yeah.
And trust me, the answer is way more interesting
Yeah.
than just biopsy or excision.
Right.
It gets surprisingly nuanced.
It does. It really does.
So help us understand this, what's going on here.
Yeah, you're right. This is a perfect example of why understanding the difference between a biopsy and an excision is so important.
Yeah.
And the key differentiator isn't just what they end up removing.
Okay.
It's the surgeon's intent at the time of the procedure.
At the time of the procedure.
Yes, exactly.
Yep.
Think of a biopsy like dipping your toes in a pool to test the water,
Okay.
while an excision is diving headfirst into the deep end.
Okay.
A biopsy takes a small sample to figure out what's going on,
Right.
whereas an excision aims to remove the whole thing, both to diagnose and treat.
To diagnose and treat.
Yeah.
So you're going in, like you said, head first.
At first.
What sometimes trips people up, though, is that a procedure might start as an excision,
Right,
but then the pathology report reveals they need to do more.
right, exactly.
And here's where clear documentation in that initial operative report is super important.
Absolutely.
Even if they don't get it all on the first try, if the initial intent was a full removal,
Right.
that's how it's coded.
That's how it's coded.
Okay. I see where this could easily be miscoded.
Yes.
It's like, yeah.
It's like going through airport security thinking you're good to go.
Right.
And then having to make a mad dash back to the check-in counter because you left your passport in your carry-on.
Yes.
Your initial intent was to fly.
Exactly.
But things got complicated.
Right.
And now there's a whole new set of actions to account for.
And a whole new set of codes.
Right. Speaking of avoiding coding complications, the guide specifically says you can't bill for both a biopsy and an excision for the same lesion at the same time.
You got it.
Does that make sense?
It does. Going back to our pool analogy, you can't dip your toe in and do a cannonball at the same time.
Right.
You can't. It's one or the other when it comes to that initial intent.
Okay.
In this case study, even though they didn't get clear margins on that first pass,
Right.
the intent was a full excision.
Okay. So that's how it's coded. But that second procedure, that requires a special modifier,
Okay.
specifically modifier 58.
Okay, modifiers.
Yes.
Now, those sound important.
They are.
What's the deal with those?
You got it. Modifiers are like little notes you attach to a bill to give the insurance company a clearer picture of what happened.
Okay, that makes sense.
Modifier 58 in particular is used for what we call staged procedures.
Staged.
Yes. It tells the insurance company, hey, this second procedure wasn't a totally new issue. It was a planned continuation of the first one.
So it's like saying, hold on, this isn't double the work. It's all part of the original plan, just with an extra step.
Exactly.
That modifier could save a lot of confusion and unnecessary back and forth.
It really can. It's all about painting a clear picture for the insurance company so the claim is processed correctly.
I'm starting to realize these little details can make a big difference.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we've got intent, we've got modifiers.
Yes.
Anything else that we need to,
We have to talk about size.
Oh, size? Okay,
Yeah.
of course.
Yeah. That brings us to another crucial aspect highlighted in the guide. How they actually measure lesion size for billing purposes.
Okay. I'm picturing someone with a ruler and a magnifying glass, very meticulously measuring a mole.
You're not far off.
Okay.
The guide emphasizes that it's not just the lesion itself.
Okay.
They include the surgical margin around it.
Gotcha.
That seemingly small detail can actually bump a procedure into a different billing code.
So wait, a small mole could end up costing more than you'd expect if they took a larger margin around it.
Exactly. This is where understanding the intricacies of dermatology billing could be really helpful.
Yeah.
Both for providers to ensure they're billing accurately
Yeah, like,
and for patients to understand what they're being charged for.
this is making me realize just how important it is for us, the patients, to be able to decipher this secret language of medical billing.
I completely agree. Knowledge is power, especially when it comes to healthcare.
Well said. All right. So far, we've uncovered some pretty valuable information.
Yes, we have.
We've learned that Mohs surgery billing is unique because the surgeon also plays the role of the pathologist.
Right.
But separate pathology consults are still a thing.
They are.
We've also tackled the biopsy versus excision dilemma, where the surgeon's intent at the time of the procedure, backed up by solid documentation, makes all the difference.
It really does.
And of course, we can't forget those mighty modifiers
Little guys.
that act like little code words to the insurance company.
Yes.
And the importance of understanding how lesion size is measured for billing purposes.
It can make a big difference.
It's a lot to unpack,
It is.
but you've done a great job summarizing it so far.
Well, thank you.
Now, before we move on to our final segment,
Okay.
there's one more interesting question from the guide I want to address.
Okay.
And it's about the role of the pathologist in all of this.
Okay.
The guide asks, if a dermatologist gets a second opinion from a pathologist on a Mohs slide, can that pathologist bill for their services?
Right.
I feel like we've already kind of touched on this.
We have, but it's worth clarifying
Okay.
because it is a common area of confusion.
Sure.
The short answer is yes.
Okay.
A pathologist can bill for looking at Mohs slide.
Okay.
However,
There's always a but, right?
right. It can't just be a routine check of the Mohs surgeon's work.
Okay.
It has to be a formal consultation,
Okay.
specifically requested by the dermatologist.
Okay, so they have to request it.
Yes. Maybe they need a second opinion on a complicated case, or they want to confirm a tricky diagnosis.
So it's like calling in a specialist for your specialist. Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
And just like with that separate consultation that we talked about earlier,
Right.
the pathologist has to document their findings
Okay.
in a written report
Right.
explaining their medical opinion.
So again, documentation.
Yes. That justifies the separate service in the bill that comes with it.
Documentation is key. It's like the golden rule of medical billing.
I couldn't agree more. It's all about transparency and making sure everyone understands what's going on and why.
This has been eye-opening. We've really gotten into the nitty-gritty of dermatology billing today.
We have.
Yeah.
And I think it highlights something really important.
Okay.
These billing codes, modifiers, documentation requirements,
Yeah.
they aren't just about paperwork.
Right.
They directly impact how healthcare providers get reimbursed by insurance companies.
And that reimbursement affects everything from what doctors can offer to what patients end up paying, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Accurate billing ensures that healthcare providers are compensated fairly for their services,
Right.
which in turn helps keep the entire system running smoothly.
It's all connected.
It is.
I bet most people don't realize how much goes on behind the scenes of a simple doctor's visit.
You're right. It's a complex system,
Yeah.
but understanding the basics can empower both patients and providers.
Okay. Before we wrap things up, let's recap the key takeaways from our deep dive into dermatology billing today.
Sounds good. It's always helpful to review and let the information really sink in.
So, takeaway number 1. Documentation is crucial.
Yes.
The surgeon's intent during a procedure, the reasons for a second pathology opinion,
Right?
it all needs to be clearly documented to support the billing codes used.
Think of it like building a case file.
Okay.
Every detail matters.
Takeaway number 2, pathology isn't always straightforward.
No, it's not.
A separate consultation with a pathologist can be billed, but only under specific circumstances.
Right.
And it all comes back to that important word.
Intent.
Intent.
Okay.
Exactly. Takeaway number 3. Modifiers are like secret handshakes with the insurance company.
They are.
They may seem small, but they make a big difference in how a claim is processed and paid.
Huge.
Using the wrong modifier or forgetting one altogether can have real financial consequences.
It's like forgetting to say please and thank you
Right.
in the language of medical billing.
Right.
It might not seem like a big deal,
Yeah.
but it can impact how things go.
That's a great way to put it.
Thanks.
And last but not least, takeaway number 4. Size matters.
Yes, it does.
Specifically, when it comes to lesion removal, the size they use for billing includes the surgical margin,
Yes.
which can bump a procedure into a higher billing code.
Exactly. It's all about precision and understanding that those seemingly small details can have a big impact on the final cost.
Well said. Now, before we say goodbye for today, I want to leave you with one final thought.
Okay.
We've talked a lot about the complexities of dermatology billing
We have.
and how important it is to understand the system.
Right.
But what does that actually look like for you, the patient? Given all these complexities, how can we as patients advocate for clear, accurate billing from our dermatology providers?
It's a great question.
What questions should we be asking? What red flags should we be on the lookout for?
Yeah, that's a great question to end on, and it's something I'm really passionate about.
Okay.
Knowledge is power, right?
Right.
And when we understand even the basics of medical billing, it allows us to be more informed advocates for our own healthcare.
Yeah. So what would you say are the top things patients should be looking out for on their dermatology bills?
Well, first and foremost, don't be afraid to ask questions.
Okay.
If you see a procedure code or a modifier you don't recognize,
Right.
ask your doctor or their billing staff to explain it to you.
Okay.
A good provider will be happy to walk you through it.
It's like that saying, the only stupid question is the one you don't ask.
Exactly. You have every right to understand what you're being charged for.
What about those red flags you mentioned?
Sure.
What should raise a red flag for patients when they're looking at a dermatology bill?
One thing to watch out for is being charged for both a biopsy and an excision of the same lesion on the same date of service.
Right.
Remember, it's one or the other based on the surgeon's intent.
Right. Just like we talked about earlier. And I imagine those modifiers are important to pay attention to as well.
Absolutely. If you see modifier 58, for
There.
instance,
Yeah.
but the procedures it's attached to don't seem like they'd be considered staged
Right.
or a planned continuation of the first procedure,
Yeah.
that would be a good time to ask for clarification.
It's almost like being a detective carefully examining all the clues on the bill.
I love that analogy. And speaking of detectives, don't hesitate to contact your insurance company
Okay.
if you have questions or concerns about your bill.
Right.
They can be a valuable resource as well.
This has been incredibly helpful.
Good.
I feel like I've learned so much about a topic that I knew very little about before.
Well, I'm glad to hear it. Dermatology billing can seem overwhelming, but by breaking it down and understanding the key concepts, we can make it much less mysterious.
Well said. A huge thank you to our expert for joining us today and for sharing your expertise with us.
It was my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the intricacies of dermatology billing. Remember, knowledge is power, and by arming ourselves with information, we can be more informed advocates for our health and our wallets. We'll be back next time with another deep dive into a new topic. Until then, stay curious.